The day the HOA president cut the lock off my ranch gate, I was standing ankle, deep in cold mud, wrestling with a broken water line that had decided to burst at the worst possible time. My phone rang, and I almost ignored it, until I saw it was my neighbor Caleb, who never calls unless something's wrong. He didn't even say hello. "You need to get back here," he said. "There's a woman in a sun visor hosting a frisbee game in your bull pasture." I actually laughed. I thought he was joking. Nobody, and I mean nobody, walks into my south field without permission. That pasture belongs to Red, my 2,000-pound Brahman bull built like a freight train and twice as stubborn. He's calm, but he doesn't tolerate nonsense. 5 minutes later, I wasn't laughing. I turned onto my gravel drive in Cedar Ridge Hollow, Oklahoma, and saw a cluster of HOA residents standing inside my fence. And right in the middle of them was Denise Harper, president of Willow Creek Estates, smiling like she owned the place. She called it community recreation, and Red called it something else. And what happened next flipped our quiet little town upside down. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I bought my ranch 12 years ago, long before Willow Creek Estates showed up with their matching rooftops and rulebooks. Back then, Cedar Ridge Hollow was nothing but open sky, long grass, and the steady hum of wind pushing through barbed wire. Gravel roads, cattle guards, and neighbors who waved because they wanted to, not because some handbook told them to. I chose this place for one reason: space. Space to breathe. Space to be left alone. Then the developers arrived. It started with survey trucks, then bulldozers, then wooden frames rising where coyotes used to run at night. Within a year, the north side of my property line was transformed into neat rows of beige houses with stone veneers and tiny ornamental trees that looked like they needed permission to grow. They marketed it as country living with modern order. That last word should have been a warning. Modern order came with bylaws, committees, and a homeowners association that treated grass height like a federal offense. And at the center of it all was Denise Harper, freshly elected HOA president, armed with laminated guidelines and the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Now here's what matters most. My ranch was never part of Willow Creek Estates. Not legally, not financially, not on paper. My deed predates that subdivision by nearly a decade. I have agricultural zoning, registered livestock rights, and a certified survey stamped by the county. In other words, I'm not theirs. But Denise didn't see it that way. The first letter I got from her almost made me smile. It arrived in a thick envelope with "Nunt, of non, cam PLIANC" stamped across the front like I'd committed a felony. Inside, she politely informed me that my barbed wire fencing was visually inconsistent with neighborhood standards, and suggested I upgrade to white vinyl fencing to maintain aesthetic harmony. A white vinyl fencing. On a working ranch, I tossed it in the trash. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This one claimed my barn's metal roof was excessively reflective and might diminish property values due to glare during sunset hours. The third letter was the one that made me pause. Apparently, my cattle were disturbing the peace because residents could see them from their second-story windows. See them, not hear them, not smell them, just see them. That's when I decided to attend my first HOA meeting. They held it in a rented church hall just off County Road 8. Folding chairs, coffee in a plastic urn, a projector screen displaying bullet points about mailbox uniformity. Denise stood at the front like a campaign candidate, mid-speech, clipboard tucked against her chest. When she saw me walk in wearing boots and a dust-stained jacket, her smile tightened. "Mr. Carter," she said, in that syrupy tone people use when they think they're being gracious. "We're so glad you came to discuss compliance." Compliance. I waited until she finished outlining a proposal about trash and visibility before raising my hand. "I'm not a member of Willow Creek," I said calmly. "My land isn't under your association. It never has been." A few residents shifted uncomfortably. Denise adjusted her glasses and smiled again, thinner this time. "Your property directly borders our community," she replied. "That makes it subject to impact review under neighborhood preservation standards." Impact review. I remember blinking at her. It sounded official, important, completely made up. "I've reviewed my deed," I said. "And the county zoning map." She tapped her clipboard. "We're simply protecting our investment." That was the first moment I understood this wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control. Over the next few months, the pressure escalated in subtle ways. I'd walk my fence line and find small orange survey flags stuck a few feet inside my boundary. When I pulled them out, new ones appeared days later. Someone spray painted a faint white line along the edge of my south pasture, labeling it Shared Access Buffer. Shared access. On my land. One Sunday morning, I drove out to check on Red and noticed the south gate wasn't fully latched, not broken, just open enough to suggest someone had tested it. I replaced the lock that afternoon with a heavy steel chain. 2 weeks later, Denise sent a neighborhood-wide email titled Community Green Space Initiative. A neighbor forwarded it to me. In it, she wrote that the HOA had identified underutilized green space along the southern perimeter suitable for family recreation and community building activities. Underutilized green space. I read that sentence 3 times. She was talking about my pasture, Red's pasture, the same pasture that had a massive Brahman bull grazing in it every single day. But somehow Denise had convinced herself, and a good portion of her residents, that because they could see it from their back porches, it belonged to them in spirit. And in Denise's world, spirit was close enough to law. That Saturday afternoon, while I was running feed to the east field, they made their move. They brought folding lawn chairs, coolers, children, and bright plastic frisbees right into my pasture, right through my gate. And that was the day underutilized green space met 2,000 pounds of livestock with horns. I didn't even realize they were out there until my phone blew up. Videos, messages, neighbors tagging me. "Is that your bull?" My heart skipped. I hit the road faster than common sense would allow. By the time I pulled into the driveway, Denise was in full performance mode, live streaming to the HOA Facebook group, like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. "We are reclaiming community unity," she declared, voice tight with theatrical flair. "Shared land should benefit shared families." Shared land. I glanced past her. 3 kids were tossing a bright orange frisbee near Red. My Red, calm, reliable Red, but not stupid, not oblivious. He remembered sharp teeth and sudden attacks, and fast-moving objects. They set him on edge. The frisbee arsed through the air. Red's head snapped up. The second toss came closer. He stomped once. Warning, I was already fumbling for my truck keys, heart thumping. Then the third throw landed too close. Red bolted, not at anyone, not with malice, but at the spinning orange invader. The chaos unfolded in slow motion. Chairs toppled. Phones clattered to the ground. Denise shrieked, and the live stream caught every second. Red pawed the dirt, kicked the frisbee to pieces, and the children scattered like startled birds. No one was hurt. Not a scratch, but pride. That took a hit worse than any bruise. Denise didn't miss a beat. "You weaponized livestock," she yelled, pointing her finger as if accusing me of a felony. "I locked the gate," I said calmly. "You cut it." The clip went viral. Someone added cinematic music and posted it as Frisbee versus Farm. Red became an overnight legend, and Denise, well, she became the community punchline. 3 days later, a certified letter landed on my porch. Restrain aggressive animals, it said. Install double fencing immediately. Along with a fine schedule, of course, for property that wasn't hers. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about Frisbee. This wasn't about livestock. This was about boundaries, respect, and the audacity of people who think someone else's land is theirs to command. I looked at Red, who had returned to his usual calm, chewing on a tuft of grass, and thought sometimes even the quietest creature can remind the world where the line is. And maybe, just maybe, you don't have to fight with words alone. The HOA had entered my property. They tested limits. They misjudged what they were dealing with. And now, thanks to Red, the lesson was delivered loud, clear, and viral. I didn't need to respond immediately. The universe, or at least the internet, handled it for me. Boundaries, respect, consequences. Red had enforced all three faster than any human ever could. And for a fleeting moment, watching Denise fumble with her fallen phone while the kids picked up Frisbee fragments, I couldn't help but laugh. Not cruelly, but in that way you laugh when chaos suddenly makes sense. Some lessons hit hardest when they're unexpected. Some heroes wear hooves instead of badges. Red looked at me, eyes steady, mission accomplished. I nodded. So did the internet. And for the HOA, well, let's just say the line had been drawn permanently. Denise didn't just push buttons. She rewrote the rules in her head. First it was Facebook posts, then the Frisbee fiasco, and now she had the county thinking my property was some kind of hazard. Unsafe agricultural operation in residential proximity, she called it. Fancy words for pointing fingers and stirring drama. I stayed calm. My paperwork was meticulous. Every permit, every inspection, every line on every map was airtight. Then came Thomas Briggs, Willow Creek's own living archive. Older than most of the houses, he walked up my driveway with a careful gait, folders tucked under one arm like he was carrying treasure. His eyes twinkled, though. They always do when someone discovers a long-forgotten secret. He handed me copies of early HOA planning documents, the kind of brittle paper that smells like decades of meetings and muffled arguments. I leafed through them, and there it was, a failed proposal to purchase my south pasture as communal land. It had never gone through. Never. And Denise had been on that committee. She had tried to buy it before. That wasn't oversight. That wasn't confusion. That was personal. This was resentment masquerading as civic duty. I realized then that my battle wasn't just over fences or Frisbees. It was over history, over grudges stitched into HOA bylaws and old committee minutes. She wanted my land. And now she was trying to rewrite reality to get it. I decided it was time to fight smarter, not faster. I hired a surveyor, one of those old school professionals who treat every boundary line like sacred geometry. We marked every inch of my property with bright steel stakes. Each one gleamed in the sun, a silent declaration, this is mine. Next, trail cameras. Motion-sensitive, night-capable, digital sentries that never blinked. They were discreet but unyielding. If anyone tried to cross the line, I'd know. Not just know, I'd have proof. Within a week, the cameras did their job. Footage appeared of 2 HOA volunteers creeping along my fence line, measuring, peering, plotting. Trespassing, plain as day. They didn't know the cameras existed. They had no idea someone was watching. I didn't call Denise. I didn't raise a fuss. Not yet. The cameras worked silently, recording every step, every glance, every note scribbled in the dirt. My response was patience. Let the evidence accumulate. Let the story tell itself. There's a rhythm to waiting, and I fell into it. I checked the cameras each morning, coffee in hand, replaying the intrusions like a slow-motion film. I saw their confusion, their surprise when they realized some stakes were brighter, more obvious than last time. I saw the tension in their shoulders, and through it all, I never lost sight of Red. Calm as ever, he grazed near the noose stakes, tail flicking, eyes alert. He didn't need to charge frisbees this time. His presence was enough, an unspoken reminder that this land had guardians, and they weren't negotiable. The dynamics shifted in subtle ways. Neighbors who had been on the fence about me, pun intended, started asking questions. Who were these people wandering inside fences? Why were they measuring things that weren't theirs? Curiosity turned into concern. Concern turned into quiet support. Denise didn't anticipate this. She thought she could intimidate, embarrass, and manipulate. Instead, the very surveillance she had provoked became her undoing. Every trespass, every unauthorized step, every sneaky attempt to reclaim what she never owned was documented, time-stamped, undeniable. I let it build, knowing the perfect moment would come. The HOA couldn't argue with footage. They couldn't fabricate witnesses. They couldn't erase the truth captured on steel and in pixels. And me, I stayed steady, calm, patient, watching, waiting. Because sometimes the most powerful response isn't shouting or chasing. It's letting someone reveal themselves. Denise had thought she could corner me, bend me, make my property a point of drama. Instead, she'd shown the world exactly who she was. I smiled quietly each time I reviewed the videos. Patience had a sound, and in my house, it came in silent clips of trespassing, proof that boundaries mattered, that ownership mattered, that some lines, no matter who tries to cross them, remain unbroken. And I didn't need to confront her yet. The land, the cameras, and the story were already speaking for themselves. This wasn't just about a fence anymore. This was about control, respect, history, and the quiet, unyielding power of simply standing your ground. I filed a formal trespassing complaint, not against the individual residents, but against the HOA as an organization. The filing wasn't loud, it wasn't threatening, it was just undeniable. Paperwork, dates, screenshots, and a calm statement of facts that rattled them more than any shout or confrontation could have. At the next HOA meeting, Denise was already in overdrive. She tried to paint me as the villain, hostile to community integration, the enemy of neighborhood harmony. Her voice had that practiced edge, the one that always makes you think she believes her own rhetoric. I waited, let her words hang in the air. Then I stood, keeping my voice measured, calm, controlled. I handed out printed screenshots of her livestream. One by one, the images of her cut gate, scattered chairs, and her dropped phone stared back at everyone in the room. "You cut my lock," I said simply, letting the statement sink in. No flourish, no accusation, just facts. Silence. And then it started to shift. Thomas Briggs, steady as ever, rose from the back of the room. He recounted past HOA overreaches, showing how Denise had fined residents for minor infractions while repeatedly ignoring her own missteps. Another neighbor added their experience, similar patterns, similar disregard for rules. The board, once so confident, was visibly adjusting. Heads tilted, pens paused mid-note, whispers threaded through the room. Denise's confident veneer began to crack. She panicked. It was subtle at first. Her sentences grew faster, her tone sharper, more desperate. Then she proposed a vote to restrict livestock within a quarter-mile of Willow Creek. It was her ultimate escalation, her attempt to reassert control, to claim she had authority over what the county explicitly allowed. Except zoning laws weren't on her side. The HOA didn't have jurisdiction over agricultural operations. My livestock were fully compliant. The proposal was legally meaningless, and she didn't realize how obvious that made her overreach. I watched the room, quiet, letting the tension settle. Denise's plan was meant to corner me, to make me the rule breaker in everyone's eyes. Instead, her own misjudgment was laid bare, unfiltered. The very attempt to control me highlighted her disregard for law, procedure, and neighborly respect. By the end of the meeting, the momentum had shifted. The board started asking questions, subtle at first, probing the legality of Denise's actions, the repeated fines, the unauthorized entry onto my property. It wasn't rebellion. It was common sense finally asserting itself. Denise tried to regain footing, but her voice faltered. She attempted excuses, half-formed justifications, and at one point, a pointed glare in my direction. But the facts didn't bend to intimidation. They didn't care about fear or theatrics. They only cared about what could be documented and proven. And I had proof. The live stream screenshots, the trail camera footage, Thomas's testimony, historical HOA records, each piece stacked neatly, quietly, irrefutably. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smirk. Instead, I let the weight of reality do the work. It was subtle, almost elegant in its quiet power. Evidence trumps narrative, patience trumps panic, and integrity trumps theatrics. Denise tried one last maneuver, suggesting a special committee to review livestock practices within the community. But the board hesitated. The murmurs had grown, questions had formed, and even those who had been hesitant before began to voice doubts. It was clear the tide had turned. By the time the meeting ended, it was undeniable. Denise had overplayed her hand. What was supposed to be my public shaming had become a reckoning for her. Boundaries, facts, and patience had turned the tables completely. Walking out, I caught Red's calm gaze through the window. Even he seemed to understand. The silent power of standing firm, of letting evidence speak louder than emotion, had prevailed. The HOA had tried to make me the story. Instead, they became the cautionary tale. And the lesson was clear sometimes. The fight isn't about noise, outrage, or confrontation. Sometimes it's about waiting, watching, and letting the truth do the work. By the time I closed the gate behind me, the balance had shifted. The line was drawn. The authority that had been falsely assumed was exposed. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a quiet, steady sense of control, earned, unshakable, and entirely justified. The emergency HOA meeting was unlike any I'd ever attended. The room was packed, standing room only, the air heavy with frustration, curiosity, and more than a little apprehension. This wasn't just about me or Red anymore. The residents weren't angry about livestock roaming their streets. They were angry about liability, about the risk Denise had imposed on everyone by entering private property without permission. If someone had been injured in my pasture, they realized, the HOA could have been on the hook. Denise, predictably, tried to frame the situation as a misunderstanding. I had verbal permission. She insisted, her voice tight and defensive. I was ensuring community safety. Her words echoed in the room, but for the first time, they didn't carry authority. I didn't respond verbally. I didn't need to. I walked to the projector set up near the front and cued the footage from the trail cameras. The screen flickered to life, showing my property as it truly was day by day. Then, in crisp digital clarity, there she was. Denise caught mid-act, cutting the chain I had locked for security. Her expression was caught in a mix of determination and panic, her movements deliberate. Gasps filled the room. People leaned forward in disbelief, murmuring to each other. The vice president of the HOA, a man usually reserved and mild-mannered, even looked visibly stunned, his eyes scanning the footage like it contradicted everything he had believed about the situation. I let the video play out. There was no commentary, no embellishment. Just undeniable facts. Denise cutting the chain, stepping onto private property, ignoring posted warnings, and violating the very rules she claimed to enforce. The silence that followed was heavy, layered with tension. Then, slowly, questions began, not from me, but from the residents themselves. Why wasn't this addressed earlier? One asked. Has she done this to others? Murmured another. The realization spread for months. Denise had overstepped repeatedly, using her position to intimidate and assert control, all while ignoring the limits of the law and the rights of her neighbors. Denise's voice faltered. She attempted to explain, to defend herself, but the evidence was implacable. Every gesture, every word, every overreach was documented and displayed for all to see. Her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling under the weight of proof. The atmosphere shifted perceptibly. The room that had been tense with curiosity and impatience now leaned toward justice, accountability, and clarity. Residents who had once quietly tolerated her antics now spoke up, recounting their own encounters, pointing out fines levied unfairly, and expressing frustration at her disregard for proper procedure. Even the vice president, previously a silent observer, spoke, acknowledging the severity of the actions caught on camera. His tone was measured, but it carried authority, reinforcing what everyone could now see for themselves: boundaries had been violated, and leadership had failed to respect both law and community trust. I stayed calm, standing back, letting the truth speak. Red, as always, had been my silent partner in this struggle. I could almost imagine his steady, unwavering gaze watching over the meeting, a reminder of patience, vigilance, and the quiet force of rightful ownership. Denise tried one last tactic, attempting to redirect blame, suggesting misunderstandings or miscommunication. But by now, the room was no longer hers to command. Residents were alert, informed, and armed with undeniable evidence. The moment she attempted to rationalize, it only reinforced the reality: she had acted improperly, repeatedly, and without consent. The turning tide was unmistakable. Where she had once controlled the narrative through theatrics, fear, and manipulation, reality now held the floor. The footage didn't argue. It didn't plead. It simply presented the truth: the trespass, the broken chain, the violation of property rights. By the end of the meeting, the weight of accountability was palpable. Denise's influence was diminished, her credibility questioned, and the community's understanding of the situation aligned squarely with fact, law, and reason. I didn't need to shout or escalate. I didn't need to confront her personally. The evidence, coupled with patience and strategic restraint, had turned what could have been a drawn-out confrontation into a decisive reckoning. When the meeting adjourned, the room emptied with murmurs of agreement and validation. People came up to thank me, not for retaliation or spectacle, but for standing firm, protecting my property, and ultimately allowing the truth to prevail. And as I stepped outside, feeling the sun warm on my back, I glanced at Red grazing nearby, calm, steady, unassuming, but never to be underestimated. The showdown wasn't about confrontation alone. It was about strategy, patience, and letting undeniable evidence do the work. The line had been drawn. The narrative had shifted. And for once, justice, quiet, unwavering, and factual, had won. 2 weeks later, the inevitable unfolded. A vote of no confidence was called, and the results were decisive. Denise had overplayed, overreached, and underestimated the patience and judgment of her neighbors. The tally was unmistakable. She lost by a landslide. The board, once so confident in her authority, had no choice but to reckon with reality. But this was only the beginning. The fallout rippled far beyond meeting rooms and neighborly gossip. The HOA's insurance provider, alerted by the videos and the escalating complaints, conducted a formal review. They didn't mince words. The footage showed unauthorized access, potential liability, and a clear failure to respect property rights. The HOA itself received a stern warning. Any future missteps could expose the organization to legal consequences. Suddenly, the theatrics and overreach weren't just embarrassing. They were expensive and risky. The board was compelled to act. They issued a public statement acknowledging the trespass, confirming that my property had been violated and that proper procedure had been ignored. The language was measured, professional, but unmistakable. The trespass had occurred, and the community was accountable for enforcing boundaries, not violating them. Denise had, in a single miscalculation, undermined her credibility, her authority, and her standing within the very organization she had sought to lead. Faced with mounting scrutiny, both legal and social, Denise resigned before the final hearing could even convene. She disappeared from meetings, from online posts, and from neighborhood events. Her reign of overreach ended quietly, though not without a lasting mark on the memory of the community. And Red? Well, Red received a reward far beyond any expectation. The bull who had silently enforced boundaries, who had reminded everyone that property lines were not just suggestions, became the unofficial mascot of Cedar Ridge Hollow. The internet loved him. Memes circulated, hashtags trended, and within days, yard signs began appearing along the cul-de-sacs and front lawns. Respect the fence. Some residents added playful variations, trespassers beware, and frisbee, free zone. But the message was clear. Respect. Boundaries, consequences. It wasn't just about humor. It was a subtle, persistent reminder that civility and legality mattered. Red had become a symbol, a living, breathing monument to patience, restraint, and the quiet power of doing things right. Children waved to him when they passed by. Neighbors stopped to admire him grazing calmly. And even people passing through town noticed the signs and smirked at the story behind them. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A bull, content to chew grass and occasionally chase errant frisbees, had done more to enforce rules, inspire respect, and unite the community than any committee meeting, rule book, or HOA memo ever could. Poetic justice had arrived not with anger or litigation, but with clarity, evidence, and a calm, unwavering force that refused to be manipulated. For me, the lessons lingered longer than the applause or attention. Boundaries are only as strong as the people willing to protect them. Patience is more effective than confrontation. And sometimes, justice doesn't roar. It stomps quietly, with hooves planted firmly in the ground. The neighborhood returned to a semblance of normalcy, but with a subtle shift. People knew where the lines were, both literally and figuratively. Residents became more attentive, more aware, and perhaps a little less tolerant of anyone assuming authority where it didn't belong. There was respect in the air, a shared understanding that rights and responsibilities matter. And Red, he remained indifferent to his fame. Calm in the pasture, steady at the fence, he continued his quiet, watchful presence. Every so often, a frisbee would fly a little too close, and he would remind everyone why boundaries exist, without anger, without malice, simply with certainty. In the end, the story wasn't just about a bull or an overreaching HOA president. It was about the enduring power of truth, patience, and consequence. Denise had underestimated patience. The board had underestimated transparency. And the community had underestimated a bull who would quietly and effectively enforce the line. Cedar Ridge Hollow would never forget, and neither would I. Sometimes poetic justice doesn't need words. Sometimes it just needs hooves, steel stakes, and a camera quietly recording every step, and in this case it worked perfectly. The calm after the storm felt almost surreal. For months, tension had hung over the neighborhood like thick fog. Emails, posts, letters, and every imagined slight replayed endlessly in the minds of residents. But finally, a shift occurred. The new HOA president reached out personally, not with threats or demands, but with a straightforward proposal. Let's put everything on paper, clearly and permanently, so there's no confusion, no room for overreach, no reason for anyone to test boundaries again. We drew up a formal boundary agreement. Every line, every corner, every inch of my property was mapped and documented. Steel posts marked the edges, and proper signage reminded visitors where private property began and ended. There were no ambiguities left, no gray areas where misinterpretation could creep in. The paperwork was professional, the language precise, and the enforcement plan reasonable. Everyone involved understood their responsibilities, and the rules were no longer negotiable. They were clear, visible, and enforceable. Letters stopped arriving. Threats and notices became a distant memory. No more painted lines on the grass, no more clandestine fence cutting, no more late night dramas, and most importantly, no more frisbees in my pasture. Red, who had borne the brunt of chaos with remarkable patience, could finally graze in peace, watching over the land he had come to symbolize. Life returned to normal. The rhythms of farm life, feeding maintenance, and quiet evenings under a vast sky resumed their place. Neighbors passed by on evening walks without suspicion. Children played near the edge of the property with clear respect for boundaries, and the HOA, finally tempered by experience and accountability, functioned as a support system rather than a source of stress. Denise, predictably, faded from the scene. 6 months later, she listed her house for sale. The community buzzed briefly, curious about her departure, but no one dwelled. The chapter had closed. The lessons were learned. Respect had been enforced, both by law and by patience, and those lessons lingered in the way people treated each other. And my land. Red remained the quiet guardian of the pasture, calm and imposing, a constant reminder of what it means to respect boundaries. When kids ride bikes near the fence now, they wave at him. There's a recognition there, not fear, but understanding. He commands attention simply by being himself steady, observant, and unbothered by the world beyond his domain. They stay outside the gate, their laughter carrying across the field without incident. A small but meaningful tribute to the lessons learned. The community had found a new balance. What was once a landscape of confrontation became a neighborhood of clear expectations and mutual respect. Trust, once fractured, began to heal. Residents could focus on their own homes and gardens, and the neighborhood moved forward without the cloud of unnecessary conflict. For me, the sense of peace was profound. I could finally enjoy the land without constant vigilance, knowing that boundaries were honored, rules were clear, and respect had been restored. The pastures, once the stage for chaos, were now a place of calm, routine, and quiet satisfaction. Evenings were the best. I would sit on the porch, watch Red grazing in the fading light, and feel the serenity that comes only after trials are truly behind you. The wind carried the sound of laughter and distant bike wheels, and for the first time in months, I didn't flinch at unexpected noises or unplanned movements. The neighborhood and I had settled into a rhythm of coexistence, one defined by clarity and respect rather than fear or authority. And so peace returned, not with grand gestures or legal battles, but with quiet understanding, firm boundaries, and the enduring presence of a bull who had taught more than anyone imagined. The lessons were visible, tangible, and lasting. Cedar Ridge Hollow was calm. My property was respected, and Red, ever vigilant, ever steady, remained the true symbol of what it meant to enforce boundaries without malice, firm, fair, and unshakable. Life, finally, felt like it should have all along. Looking back, it was never about a game. It was about entitlement. Denise believed that proximity gave her power, that seeing my land meant she could dictate what happened on it. She didn't understand that ownership carries responsibility, and that boundaries aren't just lines in the dirt, they're respect made tangible. Red never needed to attack. He never needed to make a scene. All he did was remind everyone that fences exist for a reason. Calm, steady, unwavering, he enforced the line better than any argument, any post, any shouting match ever could. Now, Cedar Ridge Hollow is quiet again. The wind rolls through the grass, the gate stays locked, and life moves at its own pace. Occasionally, I toss a frisbee just outside the fence and watch Red snort in disapproval, the same way he always has. Sometimes the most powerful action isn't yelling or fighting. It's documenting, waiting and letting truth and patience do the work. And sometimes, justice comes quietly on hooves. If you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button to go HOA Gone Wild. And I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below.